Now, I'm not the best at PowerPoint creation or anything like that, so bear with me. This is the best thing. Now, the real secret is, will I have audio on this? Oh, no, it's fine. Or wait, how do I?
I want to break free.
There, perfect. So we're talking about today, open source virtualization. Now, virtualization is a testamount and a paramount aspect of basically every IT infrastructure since 2002. And if you really start looking around, if you've been at an international airport, if you have been to a NFL stadium or anything like that, IT related or not, there is a very strong chance that you are familiar with the name VMware. I mean, with our vast audience here, by show of hands, who's heard of VMware? Yeah, 100%. I like it. VMware is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. They are effectively the metaphor and the meaning for the words virtualization. And they have been passed through every owner possible over the last 15 years in methods to generate more revenue. VMware started out as a small, scrappy little indie company that was then purchased by venture capital firms in 2004. After that, it was then purchased by Dell. It's migrated through a couple others, went private, went public, sold around, until the latest just horrifying event, Broadcom decided to acquire VMware. Now, Broadcom is a great company when it comes to technology. They are touching every single aspect. I would guarantee in this room alone, we would probably have 7 or 8 Broadcom products, either being the interfaces on our systems or integrated audio, storage controllers, you name it. But the part that people don't realize is how often they acquire software. And when they acquire software, they have a very strict methodology that they do that. They acquire, they focus on a very small margin of their customer base, and then they effectively kill off R&D and just milk that thing until it's no longer generating profit. One of the best examples of this would be when they purchased McCaffrey. When they purchased Symantec and McCaffrey years ago, we went from having an antivirus that was known to be an industry standard. It was something that you would find deployed out large scale enterprise, large scale Fortune 500s, because A, it did the thing, it worked. B, it was manageable and it had much less false positives. And C, it was constantly developing new features. This is before XDR and MDR were a thing. This was back when we had standard signature-based antivirus. They were starting to look at that XDR, MDR, and how they could develop into something modern. Broadcom saw this. They saw their customer base and acquired them for a couple $1 billion, as one does on a Wednesday. Now, if you search Symantec, you search McCaffrey, you're going to find a lot of articles such as, how can I remove this from my computer? What happened to this product? My computer no longer boots. That's historically what happens with our systems. Beyond that, they have an agenda where they focus upon these self-titled top 600 customers. VMware, as of 2019, according to Gartner, had around 87% market saturation for virtualization. If you said virtualization, you were talking about VMware most of the time. Out of that top 600, you're talking large scale Fortune 50s. You're talking government entities. You're talking nation states. Broadcom has stated publicly that their plan for this to maintain the profitability of that is to focus on the needs of those top 600 customers primarily. Everyone else sort of just get what you get. With 87% market saturation, this is a chilling effect on the market itself. So that happened earlier here. It's been through all of our federal partners, and we're now in year 1.5 effectively of Broadcom owning that. And there's been some, oh, that's right, I can't click, have to arrow. There's been some feedback. One of the first things that happened in this is VMware decided to remove one of their primary offerings from allotment. This is a system called ESXi, which was their standalone hypervisor, which for years upon years upon years was available underneath a GPL3 based license, allowing you or I or anyone else to download this, use it for production or lab workloads without any support freely. The purpose on this since the beginning was they wanted people to start using this product, to start learning this product in their testing environments, their lab environments, their home environments. with the idea of once you use it for personal projects or these non-critical, you'll then naturally transition over to using it for production. You've learned the skills, let's transit them. They had resources available such as the VMware User Group or VMUG, which is while still around, no longer has many of the benefits they had because they've cut those benefits off. They've changed up their licensing model. Everywhere in the world, licensing these days has gone from perpetual acquire at once and pay for maintenance to subscription-based services. VMware was one of those last holdouts. You would have to pay either by per core or per socket of the hardware that you're running it on, and then pay your maintenance to keep getting your updates. Now we're fully software as a service. Everything is a subscription. To make it worse, however, that subscription is still based on the sockets and everything else. So you're effectively paying, it's sort of like a double whammy environment. To keep that fun train a rolling, they decided to raise up the pricing of all of their services in an effort to, and I quote, streamline our offerings for today's market. Historically, VMware had multiple offerings such as VMware Essentials, or you'd go up to your Enterprise or Enterprise Pro, which would bundle in some features that you may not need in like a small, medium business, or add new ones that you definitely would at a large scale corporation. Instead of trying to allow that sort of a la carte build what you need and license the SKUs you need, they now sell packages. These packages include things that you may or may not need, but you no longer have a choice if you want it or not. You buy it, you pay for it because you can only buy the packages, which that's about normal these days. However, the problem came about as they've also redone their entire partnership methodology since VMware is 100% a channel-driven sales market. You don't call VMware and buy VMware. They'll laugh at you and say, call one of our partners. Our partner will work with you and you can buy it through them. Back in February of this year, they kicked out 94% of their partners from the partnership market. The reason behind that is that was underneath VMware's partnership model. Broadcom has their own set of requirements. And instead of giving people a grace period or things like that, they just wiped the slate clean and said, you as a partner, as a reseller, MSP, you may have built your business upon this. You can reapply for this once we finalize the rules. It's going to be 60, 90 days. I can personally speak to at least 4 companies, everything down from a 5-man shop that's a small development office, all the way up to one of the largest employers here within Fargo Moorhead, who were unable to acquire quotes for renewals of their VMware stacks because their partner could no longer sell it. During this time in the back end, they were also transitioning all of their ERP solutions and all of their sales at VMware over to Broadcom. There was massive layoffs through the sales aspect, as you would expect in any merger and acquisition. The difference being normally that happens after things are figured out how it's going to migrate. They cut and run. They just basically said, we're not selling at this point. We're fine. We'll figure it out. One of the largest things that's come out of this, and this is currently still undecided and within the court system, is from the major telecom company AT&T. AT&T has been one of those top 600 clients for VMware for the past 10 years. They have not released official numbers yet, or at least has not hit the freedom of information side of it, but there is an ongoing lawsuit between AT&T and Broadcom, effectively stating AT&T purchased VMware before the acquisition, and part of their agreement, which is private at the moment because they're big enough to get their own agreement, one-to-one relation, explicitly stated that they would be able to renew their maintenance at current rates for the next 5 years. Evidently, Broadcom said no. We don't even sell that product that's on that anymore. There's been a merger acquisition. This is null and void. You have to buy at current market rate. Current market rate in this case was an increase of around 175% on their cost. At the scale of AT&T that has, I believe, at the last article I read, around 700 clusters with thousands of hosts across the world, this is an order of magnitude increase in cost. I think we're adding probably 2 zeros to their bill. And as such, they have started to look at legal options while openly admitting they are looking at potentially migrating off of VMware. VMware's community has become extremely toxic when you go into the tech field. There are many out there that are using it because they are within existing licensure or they have not expired yet. But I have not talked to a single tech in the last year that has not started to look at other options for VMware when it's coming up to renewal. That does limit many people, however, as we'll talk about, because you'll find the field has shrunk dramatically when it comes to the availability of other options. And that's what we'll talk about here today. This is still ongoing. VMware itself, I have not seen them at a single conference. I have not seen them. The sales reps don't know what to sell you anymore. It's a mess. So it's becoming more difficult every day. So when we talk about alternatives to VMware, the ones up on the slides here are some of your more closed sourced options that are most readily available. And the most common one you'll find is going to be our friend Microsoft Hyper-V. Hyper-V has been around since Server 2008 when it was originally released. And frankly, at that point, it was a little bit better than a technology preview. It sort of worked, though there's a large amount of caveats. It has continued to develop through and is now continuously getting new development. And as of Server about 2019, it's really a full-fledged solution. For pure transparency at Cass County, we do run Hyper-V for all of our production loads. We have been running Hyper-V now since 2016. And for us in government, it made a very easy sense because it's part of our enterprise agreement. We're already buying data center licensure from Microsoft, so we get it anyways. That is one of the biggest expenses, however, for many that are out there. If you are running a large amount of non-Microsoft workloads, you still have to license Microsoft Hyper-V for the hardware you are running it upon. And by that, I mean your physical hosts. Windows licensure, as we're aware, is a core-based license. And if you are buying a server recently, every company from Intel to AMD, even down to RISC and things like that, are shoving more and more cores into these servers because it can be more efficient. Microsoft sells Hyper-V in 2 core packs with a minimum of 16. That means if you have an 128 core processor and you've got 2 of them in there, you need to purchase enough licensure to cover all of that. To make it more creative, they want you to license the entire cluster, regardless of if they host Windows service or not. By that, I mean if you have, let's say, a 10 node cluster, and only one of them ever is going to host Windows workloads, you have to license the entire cluster because theoretically, you could live migrate that over. It could fail over to any of those nodes. And even with controls in place, Microsoft does not care. Theoretically, it could host. So this becomes expensive very quickly. Data center licensure is not cheap. Even at governmental rates where we get hefty discounts, it is a large amount of our annual spend. Hyper-V itself as well, at the best I can say is that it does the thing, but it does it in a very aged methodology. There is no API to interact with Hyper-V natively. Everything is done either through PowerShell or through Failover Cluster Manager or Hyper-V Manager, the GUI-based applications. That makes automation and programmatic control of your environment extremely difficult. As we start looking at new features or frankly industry standard features such as leveraging Terraform for config management and stuff like that, making it work with Hyper-V is a real pain because there is not that programmatic interface to work with. You're working around readily established norms. But at the end of the day, it does the thing. Other ones out here are much less prevalent, but are still names out. Citrix Hypervisor, you may not have heard of. That is Zen. They've rebranded recently from Zen to Citrix Hypervisor. Personally, I've never seen it ran in production, and we'll talk a little bit more about Zen here. Zen used to be much more prevalent back in the 2010 to 2016. Amazon AWS ran on a Zen fork for quite a long time. But VMware came in and it did the same thing. It did it better, and there was more available resources to support it. And that has really started to drop down. Nutanix came around. Their big market push was as hyper-converged systems where they would have all of your storage, compute, etc., managed through their big window here. However, their big sell was we also can work with VMware. They would just be a management interface on top of VMware to allow you to control all of that in one slot. Now, they did have their own hypervisor called Acropolis originally, and then it went to be called AHV, which stood for Acropolis Hypervisor. Thank you, marketing. That was a KVM or a Linux-based virtualization with a GUI on top of it. Their downfall was then you can only run it on their approved hardware up until 2019. And then in 2019, they did release a community edition, which you can download for free, available from their site, but it is heavily limited on its capabilities and licensure. Verge.io, that is a brand new one that's recently come out. They are really pushing on the idea of VMware replacement. They are a KVM Linux-based solution that focuses on what they call ultra-converged environments. Ultra-converged to them means your storage, your compute, your networking, your backups, everything in a virtualization stack all gets managed through them. That being said, they're a black box. They don't tell you how it works. They are designed to be the end-all, be-all for your environment. Therefore, integration with other tools is exceptionally difficult because they are the one, the only, the one-stop shop. Largest deployment I'm aware of Verge.io is at Michigan State University. However, I believe the sysadmin there also used to work for Verge.io. So there's a bit of a mess there a little bit. Scale computing, their design is against, they want you to be able to scale out very quickly. We've seen them in large amounts of dev shops where you need a lot of resources quickly and you need to scale dynamically. Again, it's a Linux-based solution. And then Oracle VM. Oracle has its own set of pain points and licensure requirements, but they have had their own hypervisor for years upon years based upon scientific Linux. This is, if you're running Oracle VM, to be frank, you're doing so because you have to contractually, because you're running an Oracle workload. Its largest available things is if you are hosting any kind of Oracle software that does not run on Spark, they want it on Oracle VM so they could ship you the VM images and everything else. All of these are fantastic products and all of these have license requirements to go with them. But today we're going to talk about the open source alternatives to these. One thing I do want to mention though is our good friend Red Hat. Red Hat is effectively the largest North American based Linux deployment within here. For years upon years, they have been sort of, when you think of corporate Linux, you think of Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Before that, we also had CentOS, which was the open source upstream model, which was used everywhere. CentOS was a stable environment that was great. Red Hat was purchased by IBM, 2019, 2018 or something like that. And since then, their license model has started to drift a little bit away from the typical open source with you pay for support and maintenance to we will give you the build versions, but they're not stable kind of model. Red Hat virtualization was their answer historically to VMware. It was a full stack environment with dedicated host, full VM control, all kinds of great things, and they decided to kill it. Red Hat virtualization is no longer available for purchase. It is end of life in 2027 for existing products, and you cannot get it any longer. This is a huge hit because this was a turnkey, ready-to-go solution to replace VMware. It actually was compatible enough to run VMware VMs within its environment, but they have replaced it with a new product called OpenShift. OpenShift is their new methodology of virtualization with a primarily driven by Kubernetes. Kubernetes, if you're unaware, is containerization. This is more of your, we don't need to throw out full virtual machines. Let's do small level of containers and orchestrate those through programmatic infrastructure as code. There's a product called KubeVirt, which is an open source product that allows you to manage virtual machines just like you would a Kubernetes cluster. So you could write a Helm chart for a virtual machine, deploy that to a OpenShift cluster, and have a VM. Now, I've tried this before, and let me tell you something. Windows does not like to be treated like a Kubernetes cluster. It really doesn't like to be. There's a lot of requirements in here, such as cloud init or tying into Terraform or things like that, that work great within your Linux, your BSD, or Unix-based environments. But anytime you throw Windows into the room, it just does its own thing and doesn't cooperate. I have seen a lot of people start to try OpenShift. And OpenShift is designed, again, to scale up and down quickly, almost like your own cloud environment. I've never seen someone running OpenShift as their main production. And that would be after years of trying. Rumor mill that I've heard is Red Hat Virtualization may be coming back. They dropped this support before the entire VMware fracas, and I'm thinking that they may bring it back here to help out, but rumor mill being what it is. So the ones we're going to talk about here today, some you may have seen, some you may have not, but these are some of the leaders in the open source virtualization stack. Now, when I say open source, I am talking ones that are primarily available underneath a GPL3 or an MIT license. I want something that is a copyleft environment. There are numerous other softwares out there like Nutanix CE and stuff like that, it's free as in beer, but not as in speech, where you can use it, but there are a large amount of requirements to touch it for production. With those, I'm ignoring them here. Some of these you may have seen, some you may have not, but they are some of the largest in the area right now. One that I do want to call out is our happy little friend KVM down here in the corner. KVM itself is the kernel virtual machine that is built into Linux. This has been in place. It was originally pushed in 1997, and this is a true type 1 hypervisor built into your Linux kernel. As with many things with Linux, however, KVM does not stand on its own. It does not have a management interface besides system daemon calls, meaning you have to have something else to control and manage this environment. If you're talking about just bare metal deployments, you're probably talking about KVM plus a software called Qemu. Qemu is that abstraction interface that allows you to interact with these. There's also libvirt and many others available. The majority of the products you see up here, barring a couple, are utilizing KVM under the hood. This is the virtualization suite that's being used. KVM is one of the largest deployed enterprise hypervisors out there when you start considering our cloud-based environments. GCP, Google Cloud, 100% KVM. They run it on everything. They manage it through Google's own environment tools, so they have their own orchestration suite. But at the end, KVM. AWS used to be heavily Zen-based. They migrated to KVM. That was back done in 2016. Azure, they'll never admit it, but Azure runs a lot of KVM these days. Hyper-V used to be their thing, and they found production limitations there. It's really funny. Hyper-V itself has their own competitor from Microsoft called Azure HCI Stack. This is something Microsoft has done a horrible job advertising. But basically, this extends Azure down to the on-premise environment, so you can have on-premise servers and manage it like you would Azure. It runs what they call their own lean kernel operating system. Having worked with it and looked at it quite a bit, it's Linux with KVM, and then Microsoft sold it. So KVM we're not talking about specifically, but just keep in mind that the majority of these products here are utilizing KVM under the hood, and that's what enables us to have this available. KVM is released with the Linux kernel, so it comes with the straight Linux licensing, meaning it is fully usable, tweakable, everything else in a good copyleft license. Now, I do get this question, why aren't we talking about some of these other ones? Because there are so many different hypervisors and things out there these days. I've chosen just some that I'm very familiar with and have some of the largest market share outside of very niche environments. SmartOS, based on Joyent, that happened after Oracle bought Sun Microsystems. That is their break off of Sun-based. It runs its own virtualization. It does a lot of cool stuff. Beyond a couple niche deployments, though, it's not heavily out there. The same with Apache Cloud Stack or OpenStack. Both of those are great products. I have seen them deployed very successfully, usually either in higher ed or nonprofits. However, they are designed not so much to be your typical virtualization replacement, such as like a VMware swap. They're more, how can I run my own cloud? How can I do all of these things from storage, compute, etc., put together? Largest users of OpenStack at the moment are NASA. So if you have NASA level talent and are looking for a solution, OpenStack is ready. Same with my favorite mascot ever, the happy little lion. That is Xvisor. Xvisor is a old hypervisor based solution. They were heavily around for a large amount of time until their main maintainer sadly passed away, and it started to fall off from there. Same with Virtuoso. Virtuoso is around, but it's primarily driven for hosting your own cloud environment for like virtual private servers and things. These are great products, and depending on your workload, they may work fantastically, but are not what we're discussing today because we're really looking at that typical I have a virtual environment for my office. I need to maintain that. So the first one we're going to talk about here is our friends XCP-NG. Perhaps one of the worst named products in the world, in my opinion. XCP-NG is a Zen-based fork. The creators of this started about in 2017-ish when Citrix started to change the licensure of Zen Server, the upstream project, to no longer be available and no longer as easy to develop with. They are a French-based company, and they forked it and said, screw it, we're making our own. One of the main developers for the Zen Server project actually did this fork and has made this their own setup here. As of now, they are a large-scale application. They are rated in the Gartner stack for hyperconverged infrastructure as well as for virtualization for the past 2 years, which getting an open source product rated in Gartner is huge. That never happens. It is a strong, robust API-driven solution with a modern web GUI in front of it. So no more applications you have to install on Windows to manage it. Zen used to require that, which was a real pain for people because you have an open source Linux-based hypervisor and you're required to run a Windows client to use it. They have an interesting environment with a system called DOM0. When you install XCP-NG from a standard ISO or anything like that, you're installing a very customized Linux kernel on your host that is forked off of the existing Zen kernel, and then it installs a small controller virtual machine called DOM0. DOM0 is not accessible by you, the administrator, without breaking through numerous levels of security. What it does is allows this DOM0 to be really controlling your environment and managed solely through API calls from a web interface or something like that, allowing it from a security standpoint to be much more controlled and robust from your other typical type 1 hypervisors where you could log right into the roots of the system and cause havoc. They do have integrated backup storage and networking and all the other things you'd want this to work through. It can be a one-stop shop similar to VirtuOS or anything like that, but it doesn't have to be. They will natively work with your iSCSI storage or Fiber Channel or NFS or anything else that basically KVM can talk to. There is full support available on this. XCP-NG is an actual company. It's called Vates. They're out of France. They will sell you support based on a per socket license. This is 24/7 support availability. They will help you work on custom drivers and things like that if you need them for your host. And the real nice thing about this is when you call into support, you will get the developers that wrote that module. If you're having issues with networking, you don't have to go through 6 chains of support to get there. You can get the guy who wrote that network module, and he will help you figure it out. They are extremely automation friendly as well. They have written this entire system to be API managed, and as such, they've also written their own Ansible playbooks. They've written their own salt stack environments, their own Jenkins deployments, their own Terraform modules. They want you to do that. That's considered a first-class citizen for them, compared to others where it's a bolt-on down the lane. Where we do have some struggles, however, is some of the limitations of the way this is set up. They use a system called para-virtualization for a large amount of their deployments, particularly in Windows. What para-virtualization is effectively a not true hardware level virtualization. It's software driven to help emulate some of their hardware. What this means is that when you're installing on Windows or anything like that, you are required to put in specialized drivers. You are required to put in specialized agents to allow these to support very well. Where we have some real struggle is those drivers have not been maintained as adequately as they should. If you're running Linux, it's great because that's built right into the kernel. But if you're trying to do a Windows-based deployment, I'm talking you have to go out and build these yourself from 2018 build modules. It's not something that I, as a security professional, would be comfortable having in my environment. And you don't get updates to the point where Microsoft now flags them as potentially vulnerable. There's a lacking enterprise community in this. Zen servers used to be great, and then it started to fall off, and the respect for it started to as well. As such, they are working very heavily to reinvestigate that, rebuild that, and show them that we're not the old Zen server of old. And it's starting to work, but as such, it's a very much uphill battle. Training is limited. That's mostly because, and it's something you'll see on a large amount of these, their partner scope is limited. So this is sort of learn by doing. You can purchase training directly from Vates, but they are a small company. You may be limited on availability of that depending where you are and timelines available. There's some interesting design choices that have been gone into this, and that's for the same for many of these products. The biggest for these is they are constantly rebranding and redoing their interfaces for the web, causing people to have to relearn things constantly all the time. It's very annoying, to be honest with you. And the big one is Zen's lifespan. Citrix hypervisor, or which was Zen server, has went through a rebrand. Zen server itself has spun off into a third-party privately owned company. No one knows how long it's going to be around for. XCP-ng up until now has been heavily involved in Zen's development. They've been pushing things upstream. Things have been looking great. The problem we're finding now is now that it's owned by a private, they don't want to play ball as much. And we're not 100% sure what's going to happen there. If I was going to rank this out of 10, I would put it at a solid 5 at the moment for feasibility for deployment, but it's one of those that we're not 100% sure about. Next big one on our list is our good old friend Overt. Overt has gone through a sad story. Overt used to be the upstream product for Red Hat virtualization. So Red Hat has a great opportunity where they have their official products like Red Hat Enterprise Linux. The upstream product for that was CentOS. Ansible automation platform, the upstream product was AWX. They would release the upstream as open source and basically told you, this is beta, do what you will with it. It may break, but it's on you. And since they were Red Hat based products, they were known to be exceptionally stable. Overt was that product. And now when they dropped CentOS, going to CentOS Stream, Red Hat also dropped Overt. Overt sat there for about a year without a corporate sponsor until they were picked up by our good friends, Oracle. Oracle is now the base solution of this. It's based on a Red Hat based solution. So RHEL, CentOS, Scientific Linux, which is just Red Hat with an Oracle sticker on it. That is your base solution, meaning we're building upon that level of stability that's been there for years. It's a very enterprise level design solution. It is designed around controllers with high availability that control nodes. It's really designed with a true enterprise architecture compared to some others which are more home labby kind of setup. Great GUI, huge developer ecosystem because it links into both Oracle and Red Hat. If you can do a Yum or a Yum install, you can do it on this. It makes it easy. They use DMF and Yum, very simple. It is fully KVM, so all the benefits of KVM are there, and there is support available. Oracle will sell you support for this. You can also buy support from many other partners who are Oracle partners for it. That's a huge benefit because with open source technologies, if you deploy these within your production environment and it breaks at 3 a.m., sometimes you want a phone number to call, not just an IRC chat room to go in and complain about. That allows you to do this. Documentation on this is up to date and fully robust. It is constantly there. And since this used to be a Red Hat based product, they wrote tons of Ansible around this. You can deploy the entire cluster through Ansible playbooks, never have to touch a command line. They do it all itself. One of the other real great features of it is the clustering side of this, where it's designed to, similar to VMware, allow you to take multiple disparate hosts and cluster them underneath a single management plane, live migrate everything else. It does a great job of that because that was one of Overt's big pushes is we need this to work that way. But when we start looking at some of the sad things, I'm going to put Oracle, and you'll notice it's on there twice. I've yet to meet someone that likes Oracle that wasn't paid by Oracle. And even then, you had to look at them because there was pain in their eyes when they were saying, yes, I like Oracle. Just make sure they heard that. There's no integration of containerization at all into Overt. This is a typical architect base. We make virtual machines. You want containers, Docker, anything like that? Install a VM, put it in there. We don't care about it. So there's no way to integrate that in natively. The install process and the architecture, while very stable and proven, is dated. It has not changed since 2012. They have not brought into any ideas of modern cloud-based deployments, dynamic scaling, geo-aware clusters, or anything like that. They are still designed of the, you have a server room in the back where everything lives, I will live in there happily kind of environment. And some of the data installs and features on this are worrisome. One of the big pushes they used for readily available, high available storage is GlusterFS. GlusterFS is a cluster-aware file system. It was designed back in 2013 to be a great way to have readily high available storage. It has been found basically everywhere that it does not scale very well, to the point where, having tried it myself, beyond 10 hosts, if you're using it for virtual machines, especially some like relatively high speed database or something, GlusterFS will break. And then you start having a huge fall off in performance. Everywhere else has dropped it, and the product itself is, or the project itself is worrisome of not being no longer developed. That's still their primary push. So we are interested to see what happens with Overt. Oracle sort of swung in at the 11th hour to help give it some support and some money. The reason they did that is because their scientific and Oracle virtualization is based on it. So they sort of had to. How long that goes for, no one really knows. Next one is Bive. If you've never heard of Bive, you're not alone. This is FreeBSD's answer to KVM. So if you're running FreeBSD, Bive is available. Just like FreeBSD, this thing will outlive us all. It will live through the heat death of the universe. It is the most stable application you've ever seen. I think you have to actively try to break it to make it stop working. Its feature set is there. Their latest announcement is they now support UEFI booting, which every other virtualization has had since 2014, but they have it now too, so it's great. Management and things like that are there. It does the thing. The largest deployment of Bive is going to be through the company True, or through the product TrueNAS, available from IX Systems out in California. Yeah, that it's a thing. If you're running FreeBSD, you probably already knew about this, but that's probably one of its biggest limitations. It's FreeBSD. I can feel my neck beard growing every time I say the words FreeBSD, because it's just not heavily used outside of very specific niche environments. Management on this, you either manage it through the way they want you to, or you don't. You just don't management at all. Um, it does the thing, but it's a real one that sits out there on the corner. I have talked to 3 people, and that's a grand total of 3 I've ever met, that utilize Bive in production. One of which works for one of the largest telcos within the United States. They have been running FreeBSD since 1978 in some version or another. And the reason they have is the man who helped write the modules worked for the company. And it's one of those, it ain't broke, don't fix it. And if you were to touch it, it runs central parts of the entire United States telecommunications core. So some of the other ones work in 3-letter agencies, and it's very similar. They're running it because they have to. The cost of replacement would be very difficult. Next one we got here is a much more modern solution. This is Harvester from SUSE. SUSE, if you're familiar, is heavily available in the European continent. They're like Europe's Red Hat. Harvester is a new solution that's based on KVM, but they decided to basically go, what if we used everything like containers? This is similar to OpenShift, utilizing Kubernetes methodologies and KubeVirt to manage Windows VM or manage any virtual machine, as well as your Kubernetes clusters through the same interface. So what they actually have are really slimmed down Linux installs joined in a Kubernetes cluster, utilizing a software called Longhorn to provide open source high available storage between all of those hosts. And then you manage all of this like you would a Kubernetes cluster. You're writing Helm stacks. You're going through, you have to set up your own ingress and egress and all the other fun things of a Kubernetes cluster. If you're a dev environment or you're heavily cloud focused utilizing that already, this can be a great method of actually doing that because it's a skill set you already have. But if you're coming from a typical sysadmin that's maybe leaving VMware or something, that's a heavy ask. It's also a real different methodology of how you do your work. Personally, I don't want to run my virtual machines like a container. I think of containers as ephemeral devices. They die and live as needed, scale up dynamically. Windows Active Directory is not a service like that. You don't just kill a DC and bring DCs up whenever you want to without some planning, unless you're a madman. That's where I have an extremely difficult time finding a good solution for this, for at least my workloads. Now, if you run something else different, this is great because everything is templatized. You can only deploy from templates. You can't just do a next install. So it allows you to say, hey, developers, here's your templates, install it. You already meet all of our security requirements, and you can do it with a get call. So it allows you a lot of features there. This is a bit niche at the moment. There's a limited training available only through SUSE at the moment, but they are expanding this out. This is actually having a great amount of success in the EMEA market. So over in the Middle East especially, this is starting to hit very heavily. One downfall we have found is this is hyper-converged or nothing. Since it utilizes Longhorn as its primary storage, it needs your compute nodes to have local storage as well, so they can replicate across. You can't do a typical compute SAN network kind of setup in its current market. But this is something to keep an eye on. It is readily available, and the install process is extremely easy. If you know containers, it's an easy one. But if you know containers, you're probably not doing this kind of work. And the last one I have on my list here is Proxmox. Has anyone heard of Proxmox before? Proxmox is a Debian-based deployment out of Austria. They are KVM effectively with a fancy GUI on top of it. They have been around since 2007. Their big sell is they make virtual machines. They support LXC, which is a containerization product natively within their web GUI. And at the end of the day, it's all just Debian. It does support clusters. There's high availability built right in, so you can have multiple hosts clustered together, live migration, all of those benefits of a typical VM cluster, all managed through this. Where it starts to become a lot more beneficial, however, is it has a humongous community. Now, fair warning, if you start looking into the community and digging for questions, the fact that their core product is available open source means your hobbyist environment, your home labs and things like that have latched onto this, and you'll find questions that are obviously not very professional. You have to sort of dig through the cruft to find those nuggets of gold here. Where this becomes a setup, though, is since VMware has announced, Proxmox has been very close to feature complete with Hyper-V and things like that for years. But it gets rid of some of those limitations of Microsoft, such as licensing requirements, API availability, support for various storage platforms. Hyper-V, for example, does not support NFS for storage. NFS has been a huge thing for VMware for years. So if you're running VMware with an NFS-based NAS for your storage, you can't migrate without changing it. But Proxmox can. The other big push that they received this year alone, the backup company Veeam, one of the largest backup companies, especially in North and South America, now natively supports Proxmox. This was based on and driven by customer requests. The answer usually being, I would move to Proxmox, except I can't use Veeam and I don't want to lose that. They now natively support it because of that drive. I've tested it myself, it works. A couple things that are an issue on here though, limited support. Proxmox does sell support directly from the developers, and they sell that with 24/7 or the 24/7 coverage, 2-hour response time within the Austrian business day. Austrian business day currently is 9 hours different from us. So I don't know about you, but if it's 3 a.m. here, great, they'll answer the phone over there. But if it's noon here, they're sleeping. That's not good for my production environment. Now, with that, they have opened up a new partnership environment, and we have 7 partners now within North America that can provide support. The closest with is out of Toronto, Ontario. So there are new options, and that is growing. That did not exist 2 years ago. The enterprise community is still growing around this. In informal surveys through Gartner, as well as other agencies, we found that Proxmox is deployed in many areas. However, it's usually relegated to a development environment or a test environment or something like that. I can speak personally at Cass County. We do run Proxmox for some of our network storage environments, for some of our public firewalls, things like that. But our main compute cluster is still Hyper-V. That being said, I have personal knowledge of one company out of Colorado who has requested to remain nameless. They support 911 installs, including the 911 for Cass County here. What they do is they ship out full 42-use racks full of their gear for 911 so they can go into a dispatch center. They handle the call routing integration with the telcos and stuff like that. They're 100% Proxmox. They are running on an ancient version of Proxmox because their change control is very limited. But since they're fully air-gapped, they don't care. But that has been running on Proxmox for the last 10 years. Before that, I've personally ran Proxmox in previous roles in production. It does the thing. I'd recommend if you're interested in it, trying it out. Works great. The install process of this is stupid simple because it's just Debian at the end of the day. If you can install any operating system, you can do this. And it's fully web managed, meaning you don't need anything else. If you've done any kind of virtualization, it's there. There are a couple design choices that I don't like from them, such as LXC. It's on its dying legs. They need to get Docker or something in there, but they said, no, we like this. We're going to keep doing it. So that's on them. You can add Docker. It's Debian. But at the end of the day, Proxmox is an option. And if you're looking at a production deployment kind of thing, it's one of the biggest benefits possible right now. Between that and Overt, they are some of your two biggest ones. But really, at the end of the day, regardless of which ones you look at, open source virtualization is now a product that can come in and replace a good amount of your systems. But with that being said, this depends on your environment. One of the large features that made VMware just bucket loads of money was something called DRS. DRS was the availability of them within a cluster that's configured correctly to sync the running RAM of virtual machines between various hosts. So you had true high availability and fault tolerance, meaning if you lost host A that was on DRS, as long as it was over on host B, the VM never had a blip because you're syncing RAM. I have yet to see any other product do that. You also had to pay a bare minimum of $35,000 per host a year to get that feature. So that's probably why. Beyond that, though, it really comes down to what do you need? At Cache County, we had some heavy discussions of what does our RTO look at? What does our RPO look like? If something was to happen, how long can I be down? And we decided for many of our systems, we'll put our fault tolerance at the system level, not the virtual machine level. That was our choice. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't. But with some of these applications, hopefully you can have an opportunity to play around with them. They're all available for your own testing, and I'd recommend to go from there. Is there any questions or anything else? Otherwise, I think I'm at time. All right, well, thank you, everybody, and I hope we have a good conference.